I think part of that problem has been these 150-page procurement policies that everything is detailed and documented that nobody can read and understand. I mean, if you're going to go with a human reading and understanding 150 pages and then executing on 150 pages versus an agent doing that and executing it properly, I'll go with the agent any day. Like, that's where I'll put my bet.
Think of going to a restaurant and like you sit down, you get a menu. There's entrees, there's the mains, there's the desserts, right? And then there's each meal, and then there's the description of that meal, right? And an MCP server is that before APIs, right? So the different ways to connect to another system. Create a requisition, change a requisition, display a requisition, create a PO, approve a PO, right? All of these different actions that you can do through an interface today or a connection. An MCP server creates a menu of all of those options and then makes that available for integration.
Hello and welcome to Proc-N-Roll. Today we're sitting down with Joël Collin-Demers, a name many of you will already know. Joël is the digital procurement mentor, the translator between procurement and IT, and one of the most followed voices in digital procurement. His newsletter, Pure Procurement, reaches more than 13,000 readers every week, and tens of thousands more follow his work online. He spent his career inside large-scale procurement technology projects across a wide range of industries and runs his own advisory firm. Few people have watched procurement technology succeed and fail as many times as Joël has. And today we're talking about what separates the tech that delivers from the tech that doesn't, and what that means in the age of AI. Joël, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much. I think that may just be the best intro I've ever heard.
Yeah, well, it's great to have you on. And, I'm going to jump straight into AI because we're in a new age, okay? There's an age where people are building stuff, and there's a big question around build versus buy, make versus buy. And you've sort of brought in or coined the concept of buy to build in procurement specifically, right? So my first question is, what is buy to build and what does it mean?
Yeah, and I think it's applicable outside procurement and any other function as well. But it's this idea that the dichotomy of like build versus buy isn't quite right? Because if you're gonna build, you're gonna build on something, right? We're at the age where you're not gonna write code from scratch, right? And if you're gonna buy something, you're not gonna buy something that's 100% prepackaged either, and that you can't. I think that era is over. Previously you would buy an application, you can only do what you can configure within that application, and that's it, right? And if you want to extend it, it's a really heavy process, right? If I'm thinking back to the SAP ERP days, like ABAP coding and, enhancements, and it's a dirty word, right? Whereas, more and more you have these platforms that are built to be able to do that, right? So they're kind of in the middle, right? You want to buy a platform that, yes, gives you prepackaged content, whether those are workflows, configurations, agents, whatever you want to call it, right? Prepackaged content that may do 80% of what you need to support your function correctly. But then there's always that 20% gap of stuff that, either you have to copy things to force different systems in the back end because you have some tech debt, or you're doing this really specific analysis based on your business or your industry that isn't covered in the solution. And so you're still doing a lot of that swivel chair activity that I call it, but that's going to take up a lot of your time, even if you have this nice application suite, right? And so buy to build is this new concept of like, yes, we're going to bring you an application suite for procurement, right? To be able to do the end-to-end process. But we're also going to give you a toolbox, whether it's, you want to term it an AI toolbox or an agentic toolbox or workflow toolbox, but something where you could potentially copy and paste the prepackaged content, modify it based on your specific needs. Maybe you want to call an LLM, maybe you want to send data or get data from other systems within that workflow to get to the outcome that you're looking for. And if you want to build from scratch in that toolbox, you can also do so there as well, right? So we're trying to kind of, what I'm seeing is these end-to-end platforms are bringing you the ability to kind of get out of the, IT ticket death spiral, if I could call it that way, where you open an enhancement request with IT and it takes months and months and months to get done. And in the meantime, you're not going at the speed of business. And or just, feeling stuck and needing to go get another tool and getting in the business case death loop and trying to justify new investments, right? So anyways, long-winded answer to your question to say, getting the best of both the build and buy worlds in the same application.
I was at WPC, as was Conrad recently, World Procurement Congress in London, and I think I saw exactly what you're talking about. All the vendors, all of them had something where you can build your own agent or build your own workflows. So those seem to be two kind of ways that people are building now, and these suites are offering, or these tech platforms are offering that capability. What's your view on actually, coding as well? Because you mentioned that, and we all know that AI can code now for you as well. Is that something that procurement teams should be taking seriously as a potential, like, hey, I'll just build it with Claude or ChatGPT or whatever?
Yeah, I kind of shy away from that, right? In the sense where if you're building, that's kind of going back to building from scratch, right? It's just that you're building from scratch faster with an AI agent or an LLM tool supporting you, but there's still, architecture principles and like software development principles that you may or may not be respecting, right? When you're doing it that way. And so you still need, in my mind, like, somebody with high levels of experience and competence in software development to be able to review the stuff and say like, hey, are we opening security vulnerabilities if we build it this way, right? Are we jeopardizing, future development based on a technical debt that we're creating by generating code this way in this structure with this architecture, right? And so I think it's very powerful for proofs of concept, but you still need the expertise of people who may leverage coding tools to develop faster, but to be able to keep it on the rails, so to speak, right? So to me, it doesn't change fundamentally the build versus buy dichotomy. It just makes everything a bit faster, right?
So Joël, I've been, I've been around for a long time in the procurement world, and I always kind of feel like history repeats itself.
Absolutely.
And this feels so much like the first time someone sat down with me and said, oh, well, this procurement application is configurable and you can configure it yourself and you don't need IT to configure it anymore. I mean, I don't know how often 20 years ago the claim was made that you could actually, your workflows were configurable like that versus some of the other things. But I remember that. I remember like Ariba, they had this weird little file and structure and order to make a workflow. It was a little awkward. It wasn't the drag and drop that we see in all of our applications today. But it feels kind of the same, but repeated again. But that evolution let's say, well, I guess I would say that was a huge overpromise and underdeliver on procurement people actually doing this. And what happened was the Center of Excellence team or the IT team or somebody had to spin up an Ariba expert or a Coupa expert or one of these other tool experts. It feels to me like we're in the early innings of what you're describing. It feels very idealistic relative to those under-delivered promises of the past. Like, what evidences are you seeing that I can actually, as a procurement leader now, I'm gonna particularly if I'm saying, hey, this is my platform that I'm gonna buy the capability that's there, but I'm also going to commit to like building within that shell or within that suite almost, right? Like, this is my new platform versus, this is my P2P system and I'm going to do CLM here or whatever. Like, where do you think we are in this evolution? What gaps do you see exist? What are the assumptions that these tech players are making in these promises that you think that need to be fully tested before someone starts, putting their chips on the table?
Yeah. Now, and I love the terminology you use, which is history repeating itself, right? And it alludes to what I was just saying around, you just have a faster tool, right, with which to repeat history.
Yeah.
Right. So to me, like, the fundamentals still remain super important, right? And I want to see like a business analyst or a digital procurement lead, if you want to term it that way, sitting in every procurement department, right? And like, because that work of change management, business analysis, business process hierarchies, like thinking through how we organize work, the org structure, that is all still super valuable and essentially a prerequisite to being successful with technology, right? So So I'm on the same page you are, Conrad, which is this isn't magic, right? It's just like it's a longer wand, right? But you still need to be trained on magic to make the magic happen, right? And so what I am seeing with these providers where they are giving you this platform, they are giving you this sales pitch that I was mentioning, is the capabilities are there from a technology standpoint, but what makes the difference and why you want to go with like a procurement specific provider versus like a generic provider, because you could do this stuff in Copilot Studio from Microsoft, right? Is the domain expertise and the vendor's ability to then transmit those capabilities or help you build those capabilities in-house and or supplement them themselves, right? So a number of the platform vendors also have AI agent building services, right? Like essentially in-house consulting to help you build out agents on their platform, right? And so you still need to whip up, a Zip expert in-house or an Oro Labs expert in-house or a Pivot or Vertex or, Upstream Focal Point expert in-house. You still need to do that, to your point, Conrad, right? So that's how I'd answer that question.
Yeah. But Joel, I've had an opinion for like the last 18 months, which I think is pretty aligned to your concept, which you pushed aggressively around the digital procurement lead and why procurement teams need that. Like I completely see your point there. But for me, it's like, why don't procurement teams hire more technical people? And it goes back to your question around like building with code, right? Like, why don't we hire engineers and teach them procurement, right? Why do we always assume that that's always beyond our reach? We need to rely on a vendor. We need to rely on IT to help us. Like, isn't it time for procurement? And maybe this falls into the remit of the digital procurement lead, or maybe it's like just broader concept here where we just need to become more technical and more technology focused. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. And for every business function, right? And I think if you want to think back to like, why is it this way? It's like you go back to like business school and how curriculums are structured and like you're training somebody on HR or on procurement, but they don't have like IT as a main, part of the degree, right? Which I think is something that is slowly starting to change. We see professional organizations as well, right? Like SIPs who's trying to modernize and bring tech into the fold. And I'm sure it's happening in other business function associations as well, right? So to me, that's the key, right? Is bringing those two things of, yes, you want to have pure procurement competency, no pun intended. And, but you also want to have technical competency and be kind of trained in the software development lifecycle and knowing it's design, build, test, run, right? And that never changes and agile principles and testing principles and all of this stuff. And the person that has both those capabilities today is a good fit for that digital procurement lead type role and is going to be an asset, like a linchpin to use, and I'm blanking on his name, Seth Godin's term, right? Of like, you're going to be the person that's got the most influence on the impact that the procurement organization can have, because you're the most intimate with like how work is organized in the function, how it should be organized in the future, what that means for business processes, what that means for how the systems need to evolve, and like working with your IT business partner and your IT function to get there. So again, right, I'm going on a monologue here, but I think it's like that's where we need to head. And it's a slow trot to get there, right? And I think more and more the organizations that get it are like building the training in-house instead of trying to rely on external third parties.
There's procurement organizations of a number of sizes, right? You get in the enterprise level, and the idea of having somebody that is doing digital transformation or center of excellence, or like this is a luxury that exists in some very large organizations, and you get into mid-size and small and forget about it, right? The head of procurement's kind of doing it all at some point, but you end up with a couple of people. One of the very best hires I made was bringing an engineer in to run IT, sourcing, the engineering and tech stuff. And I brought an engineer in to do that, right? He'd gone back to business school. He's now co-founder with me over here at Graphite, Aaron. But having somebody on your staff, like you're talking about, in that case, it was very helpful to actually do, blocking and tackling sourcing, category management, negotiations better because, he could speak the language. He became one of the best people probably in the country around CDN, because Adobe, you know how often the Adobe thing hits your, hey, I'm downloading Adobe Reader onto your system. Like Adobe does a tremendous amount of file downloads around the world. I think they're like in the very top of, I don't remember what it was, like top 5 or something in terms of file delivery, but he became one of the experts on CDN from a category perspective. But on the side, he was helping me do all this tech stuff that you're describing, and I'm still sort of skeptical that this all comes back to suite versus best of breed for me as well, because you're asking me now to make a decision as a procurement leader. Hey, one of these things is now your build platform, and I'm inside this environment that's going to have pros and cons, strengths and weaknesses. I'm going to have to close those, and that is ultimately going to mean I've got to connect it to something else in a way that IT or somebody else may or may not help me with. But even being able to talk a language, look at the architecture, figure out what to do, hugely valuable. So practical tip for you guys out there that are listening to Joel and Zach say, hey, let's go get an engineer for digital transformation. Go put the right kind of person into your IT sourcing category if you have that luxury that can cover both sides, and you'll get a 2 for 1.
That's a great trick. And if I can add, Conrad, a couple others, right, is you don't need to have a full-time, like if you're a smaller organization, smaller team, go get a fractional one, right? Like, I don't want to put my hand out there because I'm busy, but like somebody with my profile or somebody with an IT/business profile, right? And when I say business, like preferably procurement, right? But also to Zach's earlier point, procurement can be learned, right? But to me, it's like, go get some digital procurement help in one way, shape, or form, and just get the ball rolling, get some momentum. And ultimately what you're trying to do as well is disseminate that knowledge to various degrees to like the rest of your team, right? And I think there's also something to be said for like the new generation entering the workforce, right? And them being AI and digitally literate a little bit more than the previous generation was, right? And so, you should be able to raise the lowest common denominator of your team over time as well with those new hires, right? And do reverse mentoring on that front, right? So I think those are all tips and tricks to think about, like, how do we infuse this capability of, somebody sitting at the intersection of business and IT or procurement and IT in our organization, and we get the continuous improvement wheel turning.
Yeah. Listen, Zach, I'm gonna bump something over your direction. I don't know if this was on the agenda to talk about today, but you and I spoke last week in London at length about agents in the platform. Do I build my agent? Does, am I copying the agent, Joel, like you were talking about before? Like, what if I'm a procurement leader, what am I really thinking now about these agents and these platforms that you're describing? Am I not building outside with my IT team, and I'm relying, this decision I'm making is a decision into an agent framework internally to the application? What happens here? How do I, as a procurement leader, think about this new world of agents in the context of what you're describing? Which, like, I'm just going to keep saying this. This is suite versus best of breed. It's just sweeter stuff in the suite, maybe, right? The longer wand as you described it. But how do I think about agents in this world? And is there a both? Like, agents live in both places?
Yes. So my perspective on that is like, let's just first define an agent real quick, right? I see it as an automated business process that supports nuance, right? That takes certain inputs and gets to an outcome or outputs, right? Influenced by data, systems, and also policies and business rules, right? And so if we accept that definition, then to me, it's like, you're going to pick where the agent goes or where the agent should be designed based on the components in that recipe, right? Like, is it a cross-functional business process, right? That I'm going to have to get stuff from multiple different systems, from different business functions to get to that outcome. Then it's probably more on our generic agentic platform that's like enterprise wide, right? Maybe I could build that in my Microsoft Copilot Studio, right? Because the value is not in the domain expertise, it's in the cross-functional integration, right? Whereas on the other end of the spectrum, right, maybe I'm building, an agent that can get all the data in that single end-to-end platform, and or one or two best of breed systems if I have them as well, right? And so the value is from that domain expert, like giving that domain expertise and or the data to the agent, access to that agent or to that automated business process with nuance, but that doesn't roll off the tongue quite as well, to execute on the outcome, right? And then there's a bit of A/B testing to do, right? Where it's like, you'll be able, based on your constraints, to generate certain guiding principles around where do you build an agent and why. And of course, at the end of the day, you're always trying to minimize the number of places you're building agents. And, because every system you add adds a maintenance tax, adds, potential technical debt down the road, right? So I always say, like, the best number of systems is the least number of systems to get to your objective, right? And so that number will be different for different types of organizations and their constraints and their size. But you want to start thinking about these principles of, like, at the end of the day, what you're doing is designing a business process, input, business, transformation, output, and then you've got policies, business rules, data, and systems that influence. So you want to sit the agent, you want to sit that process down where it's going to give you the best quality outcome.
Yeah, but Joel, if I think about what you said, so I agree with your definition of an agent. It's executing a business process, right? But now I think in where the AI is going, it's all going to be all about how you organize context, right? And there's a pull here as I'm, building and learning about AI more. I'm realizing actually the pull towards buy is going to strengthen over time. The reason I say that is because the context that needs to be engineered now around an agent, especially executing a process end to end like procurement, it's repeatable. It's quite nuanced work, like you said. The nuances are similar across many procurement functions. I mean, your policies might be different, your rules might be different, your thresholds might be different, but generally a good category manager does X, Y, and Z. A good negotiator does X, Y, and Z. The playbooks are broadly, have enough commonality. So I'm wondering, what's your view on kind of how you arrange context? And then after that, I want to ask you about MCP, because you mentioned the cross-functional integration point, and I think that's going to be really interesting to cover off as well.
I think that shift into MCP is really important. I was thinking the same thing as well.
Sure. And on that, like, if I start to introduce nuance into a business process, it becomes a statistical exercise, right? Where I have a chance of being right, I have a chance of being wrong in terms of what I determine as an answer to any given set of questions throughout that business process, right? And so logically, if I want to have a higher performing business process, I want to come back as much as possible towards deterministic math-based outcomes with business rules, right? But the gap in business is that we never get to 100%, right? Which is why, like, RPA has really, really great outcomes if you have a really, really fixed, stable business process that doesn't change over time, right? But the speed of business is that it's always changing, right? And so I think as you're building your agent, right, and you want a higher performing agent, you need to shift as much stuff away from LLM and statistical thinking into math-based, rule-based, algorithmic tasks and outcomes, right? And so I think that's the answer to your question, right? Is like, as you build these agents out, like, if you want to make them better over time, giving them the context that they need through business rules, so through clear policy, through data that is structured and not unstructured, through all of these mechanisms that traditionally exist already today, and minimizing that gap of statistics is how you get that better outcome. But the magic of LLMs, right, and that ChatGPT moment in October 2023 is that, we now have a better tool to deal with that unstructured statistical based decision making, right? But the orgs that get the best results are still going to be the orgs that spend the most time on getting intimate with their work and giving it structure and giving it rules.
Well, Zach, it's going to be a little weird though if you buy the agent. The drifting we were talking about last week, you kind of need to manage the agent as well. How much of that agent management is actually almost the same thing as agent creation? So you buy it, but then you have to manage it. And if you don't know it well enough, how do you manage the drift and the nuance that comes in over time?
So, well, for me, I'm thinking the next kind of the new harnesses are all about agents learning. And once you correct them, they learn. And so they remember that for next time. And so I think out of the box, you're going to get an agent which is pretty well trained anyway and understands procurement, understands the business process, can execute it. But then as you're giving it feedback, as you're managing that agent, you might need to put a bit more time up front. It's kind of like a new recruit in your company, like you're teaching it, here's how our company works, here's how our process works. I agree with Joel though around the policy and the deterministic part. Like I struggle with this myself, but the best thing to do, for example, I was at WPC and some of the vendors were giving word document PDF policies to the agent and saying, this is our procurement policy, and the agent will apply that policy. And I was like, well, I've had this issue, and you shouldn't do that, because that's where agents will start to hallucinate more. Like, you're increasing the surface of judgment, for you leaving it to the agent to kind of interpret what the whole document says and to focus on the right parts of the document. In which case, that's a good point to actually introduce a tool where you tell the agents, like, take the number from the request, plug it into this tool, and the tool will give you the result, and then use that result. So that way you've sort of made it deterministic, because the agent just says, I'm going to use my calculator. Calculator says the answer is this. It doesn't mean the agent's going to use the answer from the calculator, but you reduce the risk massively, right? From the agent just making it up as they go.
That's right. Right? You got to think about it as like, you're threading a needle with that LLM capability on top of other capabilities that may be more deterministic, so that, input out, and you still got APIs involved, right? And so it's a business process that you have more tools in the toolbox to create and stitch together end to end. But yeah, you want to put more and more deterministic tasks where it's important to have deterministic type behavior or math type certain outcomes, right? And then limit the number of statistical based tasks and actions as well.
Totally. But then it brings that point, Joel, which is like that was tool calls, and that was like 18 months ago, and people were building agents. And I think, maybe many people haven't caught up, but that's sort of established now. Like, you need to give the deterministic tools for the LLM to not come up with stuff. But now the next wave is the context bit, the judgments and the interpretation. And the shape of nuance, as we put it, is so much better captured in text than in like code.
Well,
right?
Yeah, but I would challenge that a little bit, right? In the sense where what is nuance, what is context? They can and should be interpreted as business rules, right? And like one of the best, I forget his name, I think it's Ronald Ross. Like, he wrote a couple books on like how to write good business rules, right? And like, the classic business rule is like, is an algorithmic one where it's like if then else, right? Like, you can't, it's a branch with two paths, right? But there are ways to build business rules and to capture them and to write them and to structure them, which give more shape to that nuance. I love the expression, right? And so that's always what you're thinking about, is like, how do we give a concrete structured shape to context and nuance? And then, yes, there's always going to be a little bit, stuff that changes and they need to be updated and or new context or new elements that we hadn't planned for, right? But I'm always, as a digital procurement lead, as somebody who's, thinking about it in business process management terms, I'm always thinking like, how do I get that to the least amount of percentage possible of what determines my overall outcome?
You're talking about prompt engineering or prompt architecture, right? Is that part of it? Like, how you actually put it in words that the LLM interprets in a business rules type of way. So it just leaves less room for the LLM to interpret the words the wrong way. Is that right?
So that would be like your level 1, right? That's, of course, yeah. Better prompts engineering, but then you do have other systems which aren't really in the ProcureTech space, but around business rule engines, right? Business rule management, and then being able to kind of use the back and forth you were mentioning, where you have an API call, right? Or it's a calculator that holds your business rules, right? And so when you call it, it spits out a value, right? Or what you need to do as a next step, right? And so there's ways to give shapes to business rules if you want to get that deep into it.
So I guess let me just dive in here, because I think that the procurement leaders that are listening to us are probably kind of having the bits and bytes kind of go right through their head here in their brain, because this feels really technical, right? So let me use some maybe different words. What I'm hearing you say is agents have the ability to guess, and most of what we talked about with AI the last couple of years have been guessing. And when we talk about hallucinations, it's when the guessing is wrong. We're using this word nuance, but AI is going to guess. It's a statistical guess. Hopefully it's getting to be more probably right on the guess than wrong, but there's always a chance for failure. And there's places in our business that failure is not an option, or that guessing isn't even like required.
Acceptable or required. Yeah.
Like, do I need to guess whether the CFO needs to approve the contract over $100 million? Like, this isn't a guessing game. So there's
No, but Conrad, well, I guess you could ask yourself, when do I bring the CFO in? Like, LLMs are non-deterministic, right? But it's sort of guessing. But humans guess all the time. That's always my benchmark. Like when I'm looking at an agent, I'm thinking, well, humans can get it wrong, and humans apply judgment in certain ways, and there's never one perfect.
Yeah, sure, Zach. But I think part of that problem has been these 150-page procurement policies that everything is detailed and documented that nobody can read and understand. Luckily, if you're going to go with a human reading and understanding 150 pages and then executing on 150 pages versus an agent doing that and executing it properly, I'll go with the agent any day. Like, that's where I'll put my bet. But in the middle space here that we're talking about, and I think you're using this word deterministic, like it doesn't need to be a guess. In that 150 pages, it says under these conditions, the CFO has to approve it. Then those items should be more coded, hard-coded in a way, but in whatever language or whatever configuration, configured hard. Yes, it's configured in a very structured way, and then the guessing kind of goes away. So all this language about nuance and I don't know, making deterministic, all of this really comes down to which part of your process is it actually helpful to make a best guess, and which part you don't want to make a guess, and then building your business process and your outcome in a way that increases the probability of success to your outcome, which is probably fewer guesses. Eliminate the guesses that you don't need to make instead of just going, we're going to do this front to back with a big guessing game. I don't know, Joel, if you've done the math, but I would guess that's hilarious. I would guess over like the course of a process, if you just build the whole thing straight through with an agent and it's making all these guesses, you have this statistical build of what's the probability that some point along that way you're going to have like a
plus the like divergence, right?
Yeah, there's going to be some sort of mutation somewhere in 100 or 1,000 guesses that gets you not where you want. So the idea of guess less if you can is probably the practical principle here. But again, this is really tricky for a head of procurement, right? That isn't an IT person, and they're getting sold. They're going to these conferences and they're getting sold a bright, shiny bow around a package that, Zach, you were there last week. I think you would agree that there's an awful lot of talk about stuff that there's a lot of marketing. Let me just say that in terms of what's real and what is going to be delivered and what might be under-delivered. So, and I don't know that we need to open it up much more than that. I would just say, practical tip, be cautious. Don't just delegate it. You got to roll up your sleeves and understand these are critical decisions that you're making. I want to go talk about MCP, but there was another topic that we wanted to bring in here, which is Natasha in December predicted CPOs around the world are going to be reevaluating their tech stack this year. And Zach, when it was said, this was pre-OpenClaw, and I think we were like, yeah, well, that sounds like a reasonable prediction. It's here, right? Everyone everywhere is going, oh my gosh, what do I do? So if you are faced with a decision, do I buy Coupa? Do I buy Ariba? Do I buy Zip? Do I buy, what do I go do right now? Is there so much movement that I'm better to just survive for another 6 or 12 or 18 months? Because I'm going to start putting my chips into some of these platforms and these decisions you're talking about. Joel, how would you suggest that a procurement leader thinks about these, what feel like to me very high risk moment decisions, because things are moving so fast?
Yeah. So you use the chips analogy. So maybe we can stay with poker, right? Like I want to be in as many hands as possible, right? So I always need to be putting my ante in. I always need to be playing, which means I need to be doing continuous improvement. And I want to get out of the whole, justifying these huge business cases to my CTO, chief transformation officer, or going into, and then it takes 6 months anyways to justify it, right? And then there's this pressure on this big budget project, et cetera. And so the way that's why I think buy to build, to bring it full circle to what we were discussing, is like, who's going to be a partner to me, right? And maybe I can have more than one. Who are going to be my 2 big ProcureTech partners who are suppliers, right? Which you would manage any other strategic category as, right? And I think your technology stack one needs to be a strategic category for you. How do I who's going to have the team and the domain expertise, and who's going to get me to the outcomes that I'm looking for and that I'm looking to deliver for my leadership or for my business, right? Because ultimately that's your North Star, right? And so if you get a satisfactory answer to that question, it's okay, let's engage with those partners on a set of assumptions, right? But on a platform thinking basis. And then how do we keep iterating with them, right? And in continuous fashion, not just getting to go live and then I never hear from the reps again. I never hear from anybody again. And I just get that big fat bill for the platform, right? Who's going to be an actual partner in my day-to-day business operations and allow me to develop capabilities continuously using technology as the enabler? That's how I'd answer.
But that's a great answer, Joel. But isn't there a tension here between, a lot of the vendors just want to flog the software to be unkind, putting it that way. Like, just want to build the software and then they don't want to have someone embedded in the business, like constantly there, well, not without at least paying for it, right? So should procurement be looking at, setting that up? But also you said you don't want to go down these giant business cases. So, how do you resolve all that practically, right?
If I've done the big business case exercise to get that initial platform, I want to make sure I have the capabilities to then do continuous improvement within it without having to go and shell out a big budget again, right? So it's like building that into the initial agreement. Like, we're going to evolve with this thing. Like, how do we give ourselves, even though it might be capped over time, right? Like additional capacity over time to do that, right? And then I push back a little bit on that point around the software vendors not wanting to be within your business, because we're seeing this concept of like the forward deployed engineer more and more, which is like, hey, we're going to give you somebody from our business who's going to sit with you guys and like be there to make you up your usage of the system more and more over time, right? And so they like looking at those concepts and understanding them to say, how are you going to make us successful with the business outcomes that we're looking for versus buying technology, right? That's really the mindset shift that I would propose.
We're looking at some of those same things, Joel, and I would say we're going to go down some of those paths in terms of embedded, engineering and services with the deals, but that doesn't scale very well. I mean, let's just be clear about it.
Which is why as a procurement pro, right, I want to go get those partnerships with software vendors that may not be the best, may not be the market leaders, but that are the best for my context, right? So I may choose to go to partner with a relatively unknown vendor that's offering a procurement platform in my geographical region because they speak the language that my people speak. And I think we're going to have increased velocity and I'm going to be an important vendor or customer for them. I'm going to be able to drive the roadmap, right? That might be my strategy. Whereas I'm a big player. I know I can be one of the biggest clients for one of the bigger companies. And so I'm going to be able to have a seat at the customer advisory board or whatever that is, right? And also thinking around like, what is their funding structure? What's their ownership structure in the back end? How does that influence their incentives? How is that going to trickle down to the service I'm going to get to those outcomes I'm looking for, right? So I'm adding a bunch of different factors or elements to consider in that decision, but it's just to illustrate that like, your strategy has to be much more thought through in this particular spend category than just doing an RFP and like listing, 150 to 400 like functionality and features as do they have them, do they not have them, right? Like it's, this can be, if you treat it as a strategic category in your spend, right? It can be the thing that gives you a competitive advantage if you structure it correctly.
I think you're shining a light on something super important, which is just the nature of technology and how procurement uses technology. That's just changing how you buy it, how you use it, how you adapt it over time. So that has been awesome. But I do want to move on to MCP as well, because that's a big part of it, right? So in the past, integrations have been super painful. You always need to secure some resource from IT and someone needs to go and build API integrations. And also we saw the emergence of then orchestration providers who were coming out with these out-of-the-box connectors. And that sort of drew a lot of attention because it solves a big pain point. Now we got MCP, Joel. So, what's your view on MCP? How transformative do you think it's going to be on the tech stack?
It always depends on how it's executed, right? But for folks who don't know what an MCP server is listening to us right now, like the way I describe it is like, think of going to a restaurant and like you sit down, you get a menu, right? And there's there's entrees, there's the mains, there's the desserts, right? And then there's each meal, and then there's the description of that meal, right? And an MCP server is that before APIs, right? So the different ways to connect to another system. Create a requisition, change a requisition, display a requisition, create a PO, approve a PO, right? All of these different actions that you can do through an interface today or a connection, right? An MCP server creates a menu of all of those options and then makes that available for integration. So that when you say connect an LLM server on top of an MCP server or a large language model calling an MCP server, they now know, oh, here's everything that's available to me as actions, read actions, write actions, right? And the context of all of these actions as well, right? And then I'm able to, as an LLM model, start stitching together my plan of attack, so to speak, to carry out the task that was given to me at the beginning, right? And so if I say, hey, pull together, I don't know, the spend for X contract, right? In the system, right? I might want to go, okay, let me pull up the contract first. I'm going to call the contract meal, right? And then I'm going to have to go get all the transactions. So let me go call the POs, right? The list of POs, and then try to associate them based on vendor, contract number, etc. And then give you the answer of like, hey, this contract is for X amount, right? I found all of these transactions which seem to map to that contract, but then there's these other transactions that may or may not map to it, right? And I'm able to answer it holistically with all the data that the MCP gave me, right? So that's how I would describe an MCP, and the impact is like, oh, I just set this up in 5 minutes, right? The connection to the MCP server. And so it's a game changer in the sense of like, you know, time to integration is reduced drastically. Like I've done it in my own work a number of times, and you're just like flabbergasted at the speed of integration and how fast you're able to start getting these ad hoc requests out. But then again, to link it back to our earlier discussion, is you're introducing statistics into the mix, right? And so, you know, you'll want to double check what comes out of that exercise if it's a mission critical analysis that you're working on.
By the way, that was the best explanation of MCP I've ever heard. And I'm going to steal that analogy of the menu. Like literally, that's exactly the best way to picture it. A lot of folks will be thinking, okay, Joel, that sounds really fast and really cool, but what about security? Like, what is going to access my POs, my contracts? Like,
so let's bring it back to that earlier discussion again, right? Around, you know, this is all deterministic it's all statistic based, right? I'm giving everybody access to everything, right? That's what we start from. But then you want to go, okay, no. Wait a second. Like, and I said read versus write, right? Like some people are only going to have read, they're not going to get the full menu. There's always stuff that's off menu in a restaurant, right? You know, the chef, right? He's giving you special access to the kitchen, right? And so you're able to order stuff off menu, right? And so you need to tailor those menus to different customers that are going to come into your restaurant. Or if, you know, to illustrate more concretely, right? You need to do that data governance work and security governance work to say, okay, requesters are going to have access through the MCP server to requisition stuff, right? But they can't create POs. They can't do goods receipts. They can't, you know, post an invoice. And so you still need to build roles on top of your MCP server for the APIs that are in the back end for folks to have the proper permissions and security to the different things that, you know, based on how you process.
We're internally at Graphite, I mean, the way we're doing that is the users are in, like the user login and permissions are all part of the hard coded or the deterministic. Like this is not a
in
guess,
the application.
Like in the application, right? And then the user comes through the MCP as a recognized user, and then they're granted permissions based on what's structured in the application.
Yep. And you've got all of that hooked up with single sign-on, right?
Yeah. I think it'd be really awkward to try and build it like outside the application, but it's really naturally and already existing there. You just have to add that extra dimension in your MCP connection to pass in, okay, who are you? And I'm confident that you are who you say you are.
Agree.
Yeah. I'm going to be a bit controversial, Joel, and ask you about SAP's recent API update around.
How is that controversial?
Basically not allowed. It's I think. Yeah. Well, what is your view like? Because everyone seems to be thinking like, for a lot of technology providers out there, exposing MCP both in and out. Like that's like a great strategy, especially for a smaller technology company. But the bigger ones obviously are worried, right? They're concerned. What's your view on that?
Well, so there's, everybody kind of freaking out and going like, hey, give me access to my data, right? That's one side of the story, but I think the other side of the story is like, hey, like in our contracts with you as SAP, right? Like we're responsible for ensuring the security of your data within our application, right? So I always kind of, let's bring it back to something analogous, which is like the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store, right? Like all of the apps, there's thousands and thousands and millions of apps in there, but they all go through like a certification process for you to see them in the store and then to be able to download them and start using them on your phone. And if ever there's a problem, who's on the hook? Are you? No, you're going to call Apple's customer service and start complaining, right? And it's the same thing in the enterprise space where like SAP, if there's a problem with access to your data and there's a data breach, like SAP is on the hook for that as per your contracts with them, right? And so to me, that's not the issue, right? Because I think in their policy, it says something like, all SAP endorsed calls are fine, right? Something to that effect. And you've seen them release partnerships with Claude and with, a bunch of solutions in the ProcureTech space as well. So they aren't using that specifically to block people out. What they should be getting better at though is getting to those thousands and millions of things in their app store, right? Like, and you being able to partner with almost whoever you want, but that they still guarantee that security of your data, right? And that it's met a certain lowest common denominator standard. So to me, like that API policy didn't surprise me at all, but the issue still remains of like, are you guarding certain partnerships or certain vendors or certain, relationships because you're not letting other people through, right? Like ideally that should be an automated process where like I build an app in my garage that, is compliant with SAP standards. I should become an SAP endorsed application overnight, right? And so that's how I think about that data access piece. Cause at the end of the day, everybody who's running an SAP or any other type, Oracle or whatever other type of enterprise software is relying on that vendor for data security, right? And so that's how I think about it.
Hey, we're getting close to wrap up here, Zach. Let me suggest that we do one round here of practical tips for the procurement leader, and I'm gonna we'll go me, Joël, and then Zach. You can wrap up the whole show here, but I want to go back to this put some chips on the table discussion, Joël, that you said before. I mean, I think I'm probably on the other side of this, which is I'm not going to put all my chips in the table. So the buy to build thing is probably when you're starting to push a lot of chips, you're probably not ready to do that yet, people. So I would say start doing what Joel's saying and start putting a couple of chips in here. And that translates into getting involved with AI and learning, playing with these things. I know all of you have already done generative AI. The agent stuff is a little bit more scary. Zach and I did a workshop in London. It was amazing. We're going to do more of these. Start playing with AI and get outside just the generative stuff. Start playing with agents and build your own agent. That's my practical tip. Joël?
Yeah, I'm gonna hop onto yours, Conrad, and add some color, which is you may not be ready to put chips, like a significant amount of chips into a platform yet, but more than likely your business already has a generic platform, whether that's like Microsoft Copilot Studio or whatever else, right? So my practical tip would be like, become best friends with your IT business partner. If you don't have one, get one created, like get an IT best friend and then start experimenting on the generic enterprise systems, right? Start building agents there, right? That doesn't cost anything. You don't have to make a business case for that, right? Right. It's ticket based or initiative based. It's continuous improvement. Get that muscle going of digital transformation. And then you'll get to a point where you'll hit against the barrier of the art of the possible on generic platforms for your domain specific procurement context. And once you're there, that's the time to start looking at these end-to-end platforms because you're knowledgeable, right? You know what the art of the possible is to some extent. You're going to see the gaps between, the what's real and what's marketing, and you're going to be able to make that bigger bet on more cards down the flop in the river, right?
Yeah, no, I love that. And by the way, if your IT team blocks you out, you can do what Zach's done, and I'm going to toot his horn a little bit here. I think Zach has doubled or tripled his value to his organization in the last year because he has gone home and played with AI in an environment that they won't let him do it at work. So don't accept no for an answer. Like, go do it on the weekends, do it on your home PC. There's tons of learning that you can do. Zach's my hero in this regard, folks. You guys can learn. Don't let your IT team stop you.
Agreed. Just don't put any of your confidential data in the public LLMs.
No, that's for sure. I think I don't know what else to add other than the art of the possible, as Joel was explaining so eloquently. Like, that keeps moving every few months. So that's why it's so important to get stuck in now and keep your eyes peeled, because the art of the possible is always being pushed. And I think AI hasn't let us down yet.
Every 6 months. If you tried something 6 months ago that didn't work very well in an LLM, try it again 6 months later. Do it every 6 months. You'll be blown away by the difference in the quality of the output. But it still remains statistical, right?
Joel, this has been a fantastic conversation. I think so many people can get so much value out of this. It's been a great primer into AI, agents, MCP. Thank you so much for your time. And to all our listeners, thanks for tuning in. Thanks, Joel.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks all. Thanks.